there's a song that's called "Do the Next Right Thing," or it might be "The Next Right Thing," and something about it just resonated with me, and it's been like a mantra and just a reminder to myself as these things are happening to us, that you can't possibly, control all the things, and a lot of these things are beyond your control too. They're not your fault. They're not the team's fault. They just start to happen to you. And so you could either just let it wash over you and like tumble through it, or you can have a little bit of agency and just compartmentalize things and just try to do the next right thing. Just take that first next step.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to How We Scaled It for Design Teams, a show that explores the journey through the arduous road of growing a successful design practice. I'm your host, Adam Perlis, founder and CEO of Academy, a UX staffing and recruiting agency. And today, we have the pleasure of speaking with Frank Yoo, head of design and research at Nextdoor. Previously, Frank worked at Coinbase, Google, and Lyft. And in this episode, we discuss the challenges of navigating the cultural shifts and organizational changes, and how design leaders can maintain team stability and align with company values during times of uncertainty. But before we do that, if you enjoyed this content, please take 2 seconds to like and subscribe to our YouTube and Spotify channels. It'd really mean a lot. Without further ado, welcome, Frank.
Awesome. Hey, thanks for having me, Adam. So excited for our conversation. I'm a big fan of the pod, so looking forward to getting into it.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Frank. We really appreciate you being here. So to give the audience a bit of context, can you share a little bit about your journey from your early career to your current role as the head of design and research at Nextdoor?
Sure. So just prior to this, at my role at Nextdoor, head of design and research, I was at Coinbase, where I oversaw the design and research function for all sides of the product portfolio. Also rebranding the company as we were preparing to go public, which was a super interesting experience as well. And so I was there through the 2021 bull run, then the bear market that followed, which will contribute a lot to this conversation we're having today. Then Google before that, where I oversaw the UX teams for Gmail, Chat, Meet, Calendar, and like generally the whole suite of communications products. And then prior to that, a 7-year stint at Lyft, where I was fortunate enough to be a member of the original cast of characters that created the product, the service, the brand, all sides of the business, from day one all the way up to the just before the IPO, which is when I headed off to Google. So that's kind of like my recent history in a nutshell.
Wow. I mean, you've had such a tremendous career and have such an incredible resume. I think one that a lot of people would dream of, that's for sure. I'd love to talk about something you and I spoke about briefly a few weeks ago, which is really about navigating change and cultural moments. We've talked about how these big cultural moments sometimes happen in companies, and they can have a profound impact on a team. Can you give some examples of some of those moments to look out for design leaders?
Yeah. Gosh, there have been so many actually, but particularly in the recent arc of my career, interestingly enough. So, thinking the situation that much of tech is in, today, it's been certainly a lot different today than it has been, 3-4 years back and prior to that, where we were experiencing really like a renaissance and a heyday, for everything that was tech. And more recently, though, the market conditions, the aftermath of COVID, remote work, then coming back to work, and these cultural moments, the politics, cost reductions, layoffs, right? Many of us are kind of like having to figure this out. This new landscape is so so different than things were, and it's kind of all happening at once, and so it's been a big challenge, something that's been very, top of mind for me in each of my last, 3 roles, and what I'm finding is that there's no playbook, right? And so like, what do you do? It's very lonely at times. It's very disorienting for sure, especially when you're kind of in the midst of what feels like crisis, time and time again. And so it's like when these moments happen, it's how do you manage to deal with them? What are some tangible things that we could do to help figure things out? So those are the things that I've been thinking about a lot in each of these roles more recently.
Yeah, and I think it's so refreshing to hear you say that, sometimes you don't really know what to do. There's no playbook for this, that I think that's kind of the theme that a lot of design leaders feel, but it's like saying the quiet part out loud to some degree, because, no one wants to admit that sometimes they aren't sure what to do. And sometimes it's just trial and error. Sometimes it's learning from your experiences. And I'm curious to hear, about some of those experiences maybe that you have now experienced. Like how have you handled some of these big changes that have happened, and what have you learned along the way?
Yeah, I think some of it is just going through it, and the struggle, struggling through it and finding a way to just manage it. And sometimes you'll look for inspiration in odd places, and my reference point recently has been what's most prevalent in my own life, which has been family, raising children, learning how to do that very challenging work of being a better parent and making the family work, and so I have 2 girls and huge Frozen fans, and so there's a song that's called "Do the Next Right Thing," or it might be "The Next Right Thing," and something about it just resonated with me, and it's been like a mantra and just a reminder to myself as these things are happening to us, that you can't possibly, control all the things, and a lot of these things are beyond your control too. They're not your fault. They're not the team's fault. They just start to happen to you. And so, you could either just let it wash over you and like tumble through it, or you can have a little bit of agency and just compartmentalize things and just try to do the next right thing. Just take that first next step, make a little pocket of air around yourself, just so you have just enough space to take inventory of what's happening, and then you have a little bit of ability to then come up with a strategy. So it's just like you can't solve it all. It's overwhelming to have to think about it all at once, and so as a reminder, just to just do the next thing. Just take that first step, and regroup, and then do it again and again and again.
Yeah. I think that it's definitely a good message for kind of overcoming that adversity. And, to get a little bit more specific and tactical, are there maybe some specific examples that you can share where, perhaps there's been a big change in the company culture because there were some leadership changes at the top, or, maybe, unfortunately, there may have been some layoffs in a company, or maybe the product had to change directions, like there was a product pivot. You certainly don't need to drop names or name companies or anything, but in speaking more in generalities, because you've been through a lot of these things. Maybe we can speak to some of those examples and talk about how you've handled them, and some of the things that you learned or had difficulty with along the way.
Yeah, at Coinbase, I mean, it's no secret that crypto's went through a tough period just recently. There was when I joined in 2020 and through 2021, it was just riding high. It was like a really crazy bull run was happening. Our team was growing like crazy. There was a lot of top of mind share in the crypto space for a while during that time, and things were riding high. Then just as fast as things were on the upswing, the bottom fell out in 2022, which was hard because it was so abrupt. And this is where the things started happening. So there was the macro conditions and like the bear market, and as a company you have to respond to that. You can't hire at the pace that you were, because all of a sudden there's less interest in your product, there's less activity on the platform, and so there's a lot of changes that are happening that are predicated by those macro external factors. So change in strategy, a pause first of hiring, and then then cuts, and reductions in force, and that have to follow in order to bring costs back in line with revenue. And so it's very disruptive, and again, like kind of when all that's happening to you all at once, it's easy to just want to like hide into a corner and curl up and just wish things to go away. But I think that's where I start to employ some of these tactics to just take a breath. What immediately needs to be resolved today, right now? So in this example, one of the first things that I would do is like I pull in my people business partner. It's such an important relationship that I have grown to rely on. Probably, I would say, my most important partnership when you're trying to build a high functioning, a culturally strong team, resilient team, and to put together to understand what happened. What can we? Who else is under the tent, so to speak? Who else can we talk to about this? Right? What needs to happen from here? How do we communicate this to the rest of the group? And so I think that those are the first things that I look to do when there's one of these moments that's either upon us or about to drop, where you could start to be strategic, where you could start to then reference some of the protocols that exist, that are meant to be these backstops to help you run your team from an operational perspective, as you're figuring out all the other factors, like the people things, the product things, the product strategy, and things like that. So that's where my mind goes, is to seek out those key partnerships, think about the very next step that needs to happen, put that strategy together, and then figure out how to deploy that strategy for your team. And then the communication piece of it is also like incredibly important.
Yeah, I mean, it's almost like crisis management.
It's crisis management,
and 100%. That is definitely not something they teach you in design school, or any school, frankly, for that matter. I mean, this is like the leadership, crash course, but no one's teaching it. You're just a train wreck. No, I mean, I think those are wonderful tips. I mean, to kind of play that back to you, it sounds like, that partnership, when that moment happens where you're getting some bad news and you're going to need to communicate it to the team somehow, it's really important to come up with a plan. And that plan shouldn't be done in a vacuum. Like, you need to involve some other partners, including your, HR or people team, maybe even your operations team, because they could have a big impact. Also maybe even your legal team, because, the things that you share, may impact the stock price, or, right? There are things, the message getting leaked outside of your team can have, ripple effects also. Maybe your team's not affected, but other teams are, or, so that can have a big impact on the company culture. And so I think it's very interesting to hear about like that, because I don't think that everybody has been through that. And sometimes they need to learn how to manage it in that moment. One of the other things you and I talked about, I remember, is like kind of a different topic, but something related, is when you need to have a tough conversation with somebody, or maybe not, you just need to have a conversation with somebody, and putting a meeting on their calendar without like saying explicitly what it's for. Can you tell me a little bit about like what you learned from that type of experience?
It seems tactical, but it's a very nuanced thing that could have, as you're saying, like a very big impact on how it's received. So it's during these times of crisis where there's a lot of anxiety, that's and the energy in the room is just very it's fearful. It's fearful. People don't know what they don't have all the information, particularly when you're talking about your ICs. And your new managers too, and everyone's just wondering what's happening, what's going on, when are we going to learn more, why aren't they saying more, and so in those times, if you go and you put a meeting, it could be a one-on-one, it could be a team meeting, and you don't provide the context, or you accidentally provide the wrong context, even in the title of the meeting itself, it could throw someone into further crisis, because that anxiety is so high and the sensitivities are so high that if you just throw one-on-one on someone's calendar, ad hoc, that's not a standing scheduled meeting, they're going to be like, oh my gosh, am I getting fired? Or like, what did I do? What is happening to me? And if you don't, so you have to over communicate in those circumstances and put people at ease, make sure they have the full context that you're able to share with them. And sometimes you can't, like you mentioned, that's what makes this so difficult. Like sometimes there are things that you can and things that you cannot say because there are all these other second order risks that are associated with doing that. So, but I think that's where it helps to have those conversations with your people business partner, with your legal representative, with your management team, those that are under the tent. To then, these are the conversations that we have. We call it like the comms cascade strategy. It's important that you write it down, and so you don't miss these details. That's something that's all, like down to like the meeting. Are you going to do it over Slack? Are you going to do it over, are you going to be in person? Is it going to be a phone call, whatever? When are you going to do it? In what sequence are you doing it? In what order are people finding out? So it gets pretty complicated, but it's important that you do that diligence work so that by the time it lands with the person, you've done your best to manage that anxiety and you're able to be as transparent as possible when the time comes. So, on the flip side, if you kind of wing it and you're shooting from the hip because I've seen that too, it just leads to more pain and more chaos and more confusion and further hand-wringing, it just makes the recovery process that much more difficult. So that's something that I learned is like, it seems very, very tactical, kind of over-engineered at times, to go through a process so rigorously, but when you think about the potential impact of not doing that, or you see it worse yet, then it helps you, justify putting in that extra effort.
Yeah, I mean, it can deeply affect team morale, work performance, lack of clarity and direction, all of it. It just like if you don't go in with a plan, you're going to be in a bad position. And I think also, some of the things you've talked about are kind of like how lonely it is at that in your position at that moment, because it's such a challenge. And also kind of like the selflessness that's required and the empathy that's required, which are just like things that are also not really taught. And I'm curious to hear, how did you like learn these things? How have you been able to approach these moments with such clarity, even though at times maybe it wasn't so clear?
Well, I'll say in the beginning, it was a little trial and error. You learn from your stumbles and where you did it wrong, or where you didn't have that conversation, or you didn't put yourself in the other person's circumstances and think it through that way. So I think some of it has been learning through mistakes, certainly, and I credit the people that were brave enough to tell me so, and give me that feedback, because otherwise I just would have thought everything was cool, the way I did it incorrectly. And so there are a couple circumstances that I remember earlier on in my leadership journey and definitely more so earlier on, where there were more of those conversations and those feedback loops. I will also say too that being on the other end of it, we've all have had amazing managers and have had, other managers that we think could have been, that maybe weren't the best fit for us, but like where we experience these things too on the other end of it. And so people remember those things, that those interactions that they have with their leaders and their managers, and I try to keep that in mind as well, because it's a small world. Most of us aren't going to stay at the same place for forever. And so that it's likely that we will work with these people again. And, so you want to remember that, it's about relationships are so important, and, putting yourself in the other person's circumstances and really understanding that, has been probably one of the best teachers for me in developing my own style, when in terms of helping me decide how I'm going to show up, or the things that I'm going to do to prepare for these tough conversations. And so again, I won't always get it right still, and but I try to remember that from these experiences, like all the scar tissue that we've built up, and like this kind of pseudo armor and this resilience that we build up over time, that it takes the experiences and the battles to go through for you to have this, for you to have the scars to prove it, to go through it again, to withstand the next moment. And so I find with each successive moment, each new role, each new piece of feedback, you develop your own kind of jalopy playbook, over time, that you can kind of reference the next time things happen.
Yeah, no, that's beautiful. And thank you for being so, vulnerable and expressing such humility with it. I mean, I think we've all been there and had those, maybe managers who haven't been so great. And we've maybe, a lot of times it's easy to assign blame and say, oh, they were a terrible manager. But it's also a great opportunity to have learned to be like, oh yeah, I'm going to do the opposite of that. I'm gonna be the opposite of that, because I remember how I felt in that moment, or I remember how they handled that, and I would have done it differently. So I think it's both, the experiences that you've had, like as a leader, that's like one part of the learning, but also the experiences you've had as being in the seat of maybe your team, where they are today, and having maybe even been through some of those crises back then, and really being mindful of those times and thinking about them and remembering them, so that when you become a leader and you have to deal with them, you'll have a playbook, if you will, to address them. One other thing that you had said to me, which I'd love to quote you on, and you mentioned to shock absorb and not shock amplify. Can you tell the audience what you mean by that?
Yes, I love this one. This is something that I picked up from my time at Coinbase, and it was a refrain that you would hear often there. I don't know who coined it. I can't quite remember. Something that it resonated with me, and something I quickly adopted and have continued to use with my teams, particularly my leadership teams. And what it means is, when you're going through one of these difficult moments, part of you wants to empathize, wants to kind of put yourself in the same, to commiserate, right, with folks. And that might feel good in the moment. It might even be received well by the person that's going through it. But at the same time, you and your leadership position aren't doing what's necessary to help settle things down and stabilize the team. So it's a very different responsibility, I think, for leadership to take some of the brunt of that moment, whatever had happened, and kind of, because we're better equipped to withstand the shock, and then translate that and transform that into something that lands better with the team. Whether it's adding context, adding some personal experience, putting it through the filter of your stylistic delivery, all that stuff, then helps the team settle the team, versus just kind of like bouncing it back off to the, directly as you heard it, back to the team. Because what that could lead to is it just reverberates, and it just creates more tension and more fear and more anxiety. And in the worst case, like anger, and resentment. And so it could really like spiral into something that's really bad and unhealthy. And when you think about what you're there to do, at the end of the day, like it's work, and we want to feel productive, we want to be able to do, ship that amazing feature, and like, dig into this design challenge, and, spend time with our users. But like, when all this is happening and you're not able to settle back into some semblance of a stable environment, you can't do that. It takes you further away from doing what you're there to do. And so I think the underlying goal here is not to brush stuff under the rug, but to actively help the team find equilibrium again. And so that's what like helping absorb the shock as the leadership layer really helps achieve, because when you're able to then slowly return back to equilibrium, where you're focused again on the work, and you're contributing it again with fewer distractions, and you're shipping, and you're driving impact for the business, and the business does well, that tends to be the rising tide that makes all boats rise. It's like when things are going well, morale tends to be higher. People are recognized for their hard work. Some of the pressures start to lift, and people are smiling again. So I think it's all trying to drive stability towards that particular outcome, So I think that is kind of a guiding principle for me.
Wow. I could not have said it better myself. I think that's brilliant. I mean, I don't think people appreciate how challenging it is to do that balancing act of, both having to take in hard news, having to balance your own emotions with what another person might be going through, not falling into those trappings of, wanting to deeply empathize with this person and commiserate, and also maintaining your professionalism and kind of like composure, and also the fact that you do also have a job to do, which is to help this company move forward and past this moment. And so you have executives and other people you kind of have to answer to as well. So it's a very, very delicate balance that tightrope you're walking, if you will. So I don't think anybody's got, as you said, the proper playbook for this. And even you with lots of experience, I'm sure, have your struggles. But I think the audience will really appreciate some of the advice that you've given them today, because there's definitely some really golden nuggets of wisdom to walk away from this. Frank, I wanted to thank you so much for joining us today. This has been a really amazing chat. If the audience wants to follow along with any of your thinking, speaking engagements, or generally speaking, your career, what's the best way for them to learn more about you?
I would say Twitter, at Frank Yoo. I don't tweet a lot. I'm not writing a lot, but when there is an opportunity for me to do so, that's probably where I'd announce it, and then on LinkedIn as well. So I would say those would be the two channels.
Amazing. Awesome. Well, Frank, we're going to be following your career closely. We really appreciate you taking the time with us. If we can, we'd love to have you back sometime. So thank you again for being here, and have a wonderful weekend.
I really appreciate it, Adam. I thoroughly enjoyed the conversation, and I'll see you soon.
Awesome. Thanks, Frank.
Great weekend.